Welcome, weary traveler of the modern world, to another journey through the corridors of history. Tonight, we invite you to settle into your comfortable bed, surrounded by the warmth and safety of your present moment, and let your mind drift back across the centuries. But before we begin our exploration of faith, fear, and the peculiar machinery of religious surveillance, let us acknowledge something rather amusing. Here you are, about to fall asleep listening to tales of medieval anxiety, when the most stressful thing in your immediate vicinity is probably whether you remembered to set your alarm. How delightfully ironic. We're going to explore what it was really like to live under the watchful eye of the Inquisition, but don't worry. We'll do so with the calm detachment of historians observing from a very safe distance. Think of this as a guided meditation through discomfort, a lullaby composed of footnotes and primary sources. If you're still awake by the end, well, that's a failure on my part, isn't it? Tonight's journey takes us into the daily reality of ordinary people living in Spain, Italy, and parts of France during the height of the various Inquisitions, roughly spanning from the late 1400s through the 1700s. We'll walk through 4 distinct landscapes of this era. First, we'll experience the suffocating atmosphere of daily life, where every word mattered and every neighbor might be listening. Then, we'll step into the surprisingly mundane routine of an inquisitor himself, a bureaucrat of the soul, if you will. Our third segment explores the mysteries hidden in lost trial records and burned documents. Finally, we'll climb the social ladder to observe how the architects of this system lived in rather comfortable irony, far removed from the fear they orchestrated. Before we properly begin, a small request. If you enjoy these journeys through the uncomfortable corners of history, do consider subscribing to Religious Stories for Sleep. Leave a comment sharing which historical period keeps you awake at night, or rather, which one you'd like us to use to help you sleep. And if you found this video soothing, or at least adequately soporific alike, helps us continue producing these peculiar bedtime stories. Now then, let your breathing slow. Feel the weight of your body against your mattress. Be grateful, as you drift off, that the most significant inquisition you face is your own mind's tendency to replay embarrassing moments from years ago. Imagine yourself, not here, but there, in a world where faith was not a private comfort but a public performance, constantly scrutinized. The rhythm of your modern life, predictable, documented, legally protected, is about to give way to something far more precarious. Let us begin. Imagine yourself waking in a modest home in Toledo, Spain, in the year 1520. The morning light filters through small windows covered with oiled cloth, casting a dim amber glow across your room. You can hear the bells of the cathedral calling the faithful to morning prayers, their deep tones resonating through the stone streets. This sound, which might seem peaceful, is actually your first reminder of the day. You are being watched. Not by human eyes yet, but by the divine gaze that, according to the Church, never blinks, never sleeps, never forgives an unnoticed transgression. You rise from your straw mattress, your joints stiff from the unforgiving surface. The air is cool, almost damp, carrying the scent of wood smoke from neighboring homes and the faint, ever-present smell of human waste from the streets outside. These are the ordinary discomforts of the era, the baseline of daily existence. But there is another discomfort here, one that cannot be aired out or warmed away, the constant, gnawing awareness that your immortal soul is under review. Your first task of the day involves a decision that your modern counterpart would find absurd: what to say when you greet your neighbors. You see, language itself has become a minefield. There are phrases that mark you as a good Christian, and phrases that might suggest you hold other beliefs. If you're a converso, a converted Jew or Muslim, or descended from one, this calculation is even more delicate. Do you say, "God be with you"? Or do you use the older Hebrew greeting you learned from your grandmother before she died? Even thinking about that choice is dangerous. The rhythm of your thoughts must be monitored, edited, approved by an internal censor before they become words. You descend the narrow stairs to your main living area, where your family is already stirring. Your wife is preparing a simple breakfast: bread, perhaps some cheese if you've been fortunate, watered wine. But here again, surveillance intrudes. What you eat, when you eat it, how you prepare it. These mundane acts are laden with significance. The Inquisition paid particular attention to dietary habits. Did you avoid pork? That might suggest you still held Jewish beliefs. Did you refuse to eat on certain Muslim holy days, even if you claimed not to know which days they were? Suspicious. Did you change your linens on Saturday, the Jewish Sabbath rather than Sunday? Someone might notice. Someone might report. The truly exhausting part is not the watching itself, but the uncertainty of it. You don't know who the watchers are. Your neighbor who smiled at you yesterday might be composing a denunciation this morning. The seamstress who altered your cloak might have noticed that you wore it in a style associated with Jewish merchants. The baker who sells you bread might have mentioned to someone that you asked for it without making the sign of the cross first. A tiny omission, meaningless perhaps. Or perhaps the first thread that, when pulled, unravels your entire life. Let us pause here and consider the psychological architecture of this fear. Modern surveillance, for all its pervasiveness, operates with a certain logic. Cameras are visible. Laws are written. You can reasonably predict what might trigger scrutiny. But Inquisition-era surveillance was wonderfully, terribly arbitrary. The system encouraged denunciations, often rewarded them, but never quite specified what was worth reporting. This created a paranoia that was self-sustaining, requiring minimal actual oversight. People policed themselves, policed each other, because the consequences of failing to do so were too catastrophic to risk. You finish your meager breakfast and prepare to leave your home for the day's work. Perhaps you're a merchant, or a craftsman, or a laborer. The specific occupation matters less than the fact that your work will take you into public spaces, where the performance of faith continues. You must be seen attending Mass, not just attending, but attending with the proper demeanor, attentive but not overly zealous, which might suggest you're compensating for hidden doubts. You must know the prayers by heart, recite them with your lips moving at precisely the right moments. You must receive communion with the appropriate reverence, swallowing the host immediately rather than holding it in your mouth, which might suggest you plan to desecrate it later. The streets of Toledo are narrow, winding affairs, buildings leaning toward each other as if sharing secrets. The air is thick with the smell of leather from the tanners, smoke from workshops, and humanity pressed close together. You pass the butcher's shop, where hanging carcasses attract clouds of flies. You pass the parish church, where a group of men are gathered outside, speaking in low tones. Do you join them or keep walking? Either choice can be interpreted. Joining suggests you have nothing to hide. Walking past suggests the same, or suggests you're avoiding scrutiny. There is no neutral action, no gesture without significance. You reach your workplace. Let's say you're a weaver working with wool, your hands stained with dyes, your back perpetually aching from hunching over your loom. The work itself is repetitive, almost meditative, the rhythm of the shuttle passing back and forth, back and forth. But even here, in the mechanical routine of labor, your mind cannot rest. You work alongside other weavers, and conversation is inevitable during the long hours. What do you discuss? The weather is safe, but dull. Politics is dangerous. Religion is perilous in a different way. Express too much certainty, and you might be accused of heresy. Express doubt, and you've condemned yourself. One of your fellow weavers, an older man named Fernando, begins to speak about a sermon he heard last Sunday. The priest had spoken about the nature of grace, whether it could be earned through works or was granted solely through faith. This is dangerous territory, touching on debates that have fractured Christianity, sent reformers to the stake, toppled bishops. Do you engage with this topic? Do you offer an opinion? The safest response is to agree vaguely with whatever Fernando says. But what if Fernando himself is testing you? What if he's been asked by the local priest to sound out the workers, to identify anyone who might hold Protestant sympathies? You murmur something non-committal, something that could be interpreted as agreement or mere acknowledgement, and return your focus to the loom. The shuttle passes back and forth, back and forth. The rhythm of your life measured in caution and compromise. Midday arrives, and with it, the bells calling the faithful to prayer. You stop your work, as do the others, and together you recite the Angelus. The words flow automatically from your lips. The angel of the Lord declared unto Mary, and she conceived of the Holy Spirit. You've said these words thousands of times. They've become a kind of protective spell, a demonstration of orthodoxy that costs you nothing, except, perhaps, the quiet, growing sense that your inner life and your outer performance have become two entirely separate things. You return to work, but the afternoon is interrupted by a commotion in the street. A crowd is gathering, voices raised in excitement and something that might be fear. You set down your work and join the others at the workshop door, peering out to see what's happening. A procession is passing through the street, not a religious procession, but something far more unsettling. It's a group of familiars, the lay officers of the Inquisition, escorting a prisoner toward the Inquisition's headquarters. The prisoner is a woman, perhaps 40 years old, her face pale and set in an expression of rigid control. She walks with her head down, hands bound before her. The crowd watches in silence, a few people making the sign of the cross, others simply staring. You don't know who she is or what she's accused of. It doesn't matter. What matters is the reminder. This could be you. Any day, any hour, the knock could come. The system makes no promises, offers no guarantees. Innocence is not a shield. In fact, the concept of innocence barely exists in this framework. There are only those who have confessed and those who have not yet been properly questioned. The procession passes, and the street slowly returns to its normal rhythm. But something has changed. The air feels heavier, as if the woman's fear has been absorbed by the stones of the buildings, by the very dirt of the street. Your fellow weavers return to work without speaking. There's nothing to say. Everything has been said in that silence. The afternoon stretches on, the light gradually fading as the sun moves across the sky. Your hands continue their work, muscle memory guiding the shuttle even as your mind wanders. You think about your family, about your children. What world are you bringing them into? How do you teach them to navigate this landscape of suspicion without teaching them to become suspicious themselves? How do you explain that certain prayers must be said aloud, while other thoughts must never be spoken? How do you model faith when faith itself has become indistinguishable from fear? Evening comes, and with it, the end of the workday. You gather your things, exchange brief farewells with your fellow workers, and begin the walk home. The streets are growing dark, shadows lengthening between buildings. Oil lamps flicker in windows, casting uncertain light. You pass a tavern where men are drinking, their voices loud with wine-induced confidence. You keep walking. Taverns are dangerous places where loosened tongues might say things that sober minds would suppress. It's better not to be associated with such places. Better not to be remembered as someone who was there when an ill-considered comment was made. You arrive home as the cathedral bells ring for evening prayers. Your wife has prepared a simple dinner: vegetable pottage, more bread, perhaps a bit of salted fish if the week has been profitable. You eat together, your family gathered around the small table. Your eldest daughter, 12 years old, chatters about her day, about the women she helped with their laundry, about gossip she overheard. You listen with half your attention, the other half performing its endless vigilance. Is she saying anything that could be misconstrued? Is she repeating something that someone else might interpret as heretical? After dinner, there are chores to complete, small repairs to make, children to settle. The routine of domestic life provides a kind of comfort, a structure that feels almost normal. But even here, in the privacy of your home, complete relaxation is impossible. Walls have ears, not metaphorically, but literally. The Inquisition specifically encouraged servants to report on their employers, children on their parents, wives on their husbands. Family loyalty was noble, but loyalty to the church superseded all earthly bonds. This was made explicit, preached from pulpits, reinforced through exemplary cases where children who denounced their heretical parents were held up as models of virtue. As night deepens, you prepare for sleep. You kneel beside your bed for evening prayers, your family joining you. The words are familiar, comforting in their repetition. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. But even as you pray, even as you speak directly to God, there's a part of your mind that remains alert, monitoring your performance. Are you praying with sufficient devotion? Are you using the correct form of the prayers? Is there anything in your posture, your tone, your expression that might be interpreted as insincerity? You climb into bed, your body exhausted from the day's labor, your mind exhausted from its constant vigilance. Your wife lies beside you, and in the darkness, she whispers a question. Do you think Maria was denounced? Is that why they took her? Maria, the woman you saw being led through the streets this afternoon. You realize you do know her, or know of her. She's a widow, lives alone, keeps mostly to herself. There were rumors, weren't there? Something about her grandmother having been Jewish, something about strange herbs she kept in her garden, something about prayers she supposedly murmured that didn't sound quite Christian. I don't know, you whisper back. It's better not to speculate. Your wife is silent for a moment. Then, her daughter is the same age as our Catalina. They play together sometimes. You understand what she's not saying. Should you distance your family from Maria's? If Maria is found guilty of heresy, will association with her family taint your own reputation? But if you suddenly withdraw your daughter from the friendship, will that be noticed? Will that itself be suspicious, suggesting you knew something or feared something? We'll see, you say finally, which is no answer at all. You lie in the darkness, listening to the sound of your wife's breathing gradually slow and deepen as she falls asleep. You remain awake, your thoughts circling like worried birds unable to find a place to land. You think about Mariah, about her daughter, about all the small decisions that might have led to her arrest. Did she refuse to eat pork at someone's house? Did she light candles on Friday evening? Did someone notice that she closed her eyes when she passed a crucifix, rather than crossing herself? Or was it something even more trivial, a grudge, a debt unpaid, a jealousy dressed up in religious concern? The exhausting truth is that you'll never know. The Inquisition's proceedings are secret. If Mariah confesses under questioning, you might hear about it. If she's reconciled to the Church, there will be a public ceremony. If she's found guilty of obstinate heresy, there will be an auto da fe, a public spectacle where she'll be burned at the stake. But the actual evidence against her, the testimony of witnesses, the logic that led to her arrest, all of that remains hidden behind the closed doors of the Inquisition's chambers. This opacity is part of the system's power. If you knew exactly what triggered investigation, you could calibrate your behavior accordingly. But uncertainty forces you to police every aspect of your life, to treat every moment as potentially significant. It's a remarkably efficient form of control, requiring relatively few actual inquisitors to regulate the behavior of entire populations. You drift, finally, toward sleep. But even in that threshold space, between waking and dreaming, vigilance doesn't entirely cease. Your dreams, when they come, are anxious affairs, testifying before inquisitors, unable to remember the words of prayers, searching desperately for something you've lost, but can't remember ever having. In the morning, the cycle begins again. The bells, the prayers, the performance, the fear, not sharp and immediate like pain, but dull and constant like hunger. This is the texture of daily life under the Inquisition, not dramatic conflagrations of religious violence, but the slow, grinding anxiety of never being quite certain that you're safe. Weeks pass this way. Months, years. You become accustomed to the fear in the way one becomes accustomed to any chronic condition. It's always there, sometimes sharper, sometimes duller, but never entirely absent. You learn the unwritten rules through observation and rumor. You learn who is currently in favor with the local priests, who has recently fallen under suspicion. You learn to read the subtle signs in how people greet you, whether they're maintaining safe distance or risking association. You hear about arrests, trials, reconciliations, executions. The rhythm of the Inquisition becomes as familiar as the seasons. In some years it's more active, responding to perceived threats or to political pressures from above. In other years, it's quieter, the machinery idling but never stopping entirely. You learn to anticipate periods of heightened scrutiny after major religious holidays, during Lent, whenever there's news of Protestant movements in the north, whenever war with Muslim powers seems imminent. Your children grow. Your eldest daughter marries, moves to a different parish. Your son begins learning a trade. You yourself grow older, your back more bent from years at the loom, your hands twisted with the early signs of arthritis. The physical demands of life are relentless, but they're at least comprehensible. Your body's deterioration follows predictable patterns. The Inquisition's attention does not. One evening, 20 years after that day when you saw Maria led through the streets, you learn her fate. She was reconciled, it turns out. She confessed to having privately observed some Jewish customs taught to her by her grandmother, performed penance, paid a heavy fine, and was released. She left Toledo shortly after, moved to a different city where her history was less known. Her daughter, the one who played with your Catalina, disappeared from the neighborhood. No one speaks of them now. Their story has been erased, smoothed over like footprints in sand. This is perhaps the most unsettling realization of all: how thoroughly the system manages to make people disappear. Not always through execution, though that certainly happened, but through fear, through exile, through the deliberate forgetting that communities practice to protect themselves. If we don't remember, if we don't speak of it, perhaps it didn't really happen. Perhaps we won't be next. You're an old man now, your working days nearing their end. Your children have their own families, their own anxieties to navigate. The Inquisition is still there, still active, though it feels like it's been there forever, like it's a natural feature of the landscape, rather than a human institution with a beginning and, presumably, an ending. You can't really imagine what life would be like without it. How would people know how to behave? What would regulate the boundaries of acceptable belief? The fear has become so fundamental that its absence seems unthinkable, almost frightening in itself. On a particular autumn afternoon, as the light slants golden through your window and you sit mending a tear in your old cloak, you have an idle thought. What would it be like to speak freely? Just once, to say exactly what you think without first running it through the filters of orthodoxy, without calculating how it might be interpreted, without measuring it against the constantly shifting standards of acceptable expression. You can't even articulate what you would say, because the filters are so deeply embedded in your thinking that you're not sure what your unedited thoughts might actually be. This, perhaps, is the most complete victory of the system, not that it makes you comply externally, but that it colonizes your inner life so thoroughly that dissent becomes unthinkable, even to yourself. You've internalized the Inquisitor, made him a permanent resident of your own consciousness. He's there in every conversation you have with yourself, every doubt you feel, every moment of questioning. He's been there so long that you've forgotten he's not actually you. The afternoon light fades. Evening comes, bringing with it the familiar call to prayer. You set aside your mending, kneel beside your chair, your knees complaining loudly about this daily ritual, and recite the words you've said every evening for 7 decades. The words are empty sounds now, worn smooth by repetition until they've lost all meaning. But you say them anyway, because you've always said them, because everyone says them, because not saying them would be unthinkable. And tomorrow you'll wake to the bells again, and the cycle will continue, as it has continued for your entire life, as it will continue after you're gone. The rhythm of faith and fear, indistinguishable from each other, marking time in a world where even your thoughts are not entirely your own. This, then, is why you wouldn't last a day living under Inquisition fear, not because you'd be immediately arrested or executed, but because the weight of constant vigilance, of performance without end, of uncertainty that never resolves would crush something essential in you. Your modern mind, accustomed to privacy, to the luxury of internal dissent, to the assumption that your thoughts are your own, it simply isn't built for this kind of sustained psychological pressure. But perhaps you're growing tired now, dear listener. Perhaps these tales of anxiety have paradoxically begun to soothe you, as contemplating the sufferings of the past often makes our present troubles seem lighter by comparison. As you drift toward sleep, Be grateful for the invisible shield of secular law that protects you, for the assumption of privacy that allows your thoughts to remain your own, for the glorious, underappreciated freedom to be wrong, to doubt, to question, without fearing that your questions will be treated as sins. The rhythm of daily life under the Inquisition fades now, receding into history where it belongs, leaving you here, safe in your present, with nothing more threatening than the morning alarm that awaits you. Rest well, knowing that no one is tallying your prayers, measuring your faith, or watching for signs of deviation. Your surveillance is of an entirely different, considerably less existential variety. We've completed our first segment, but our journey through this era is not finished. When we return, we'll step into the offices and chambers of the Inquisitors themselves, those peculiar men who made careers of judging souls. But that exploration awaits. For now, let the tensions of Toledo's streets dissolve, let the anxieties of surveillance fade, and allow yourself to sink into the quiet, unremarkable safety of your own bed. Sleep beckons. Answer its call. Welcome back, patient traveler through history's quieter corridors. If you're still awake, we're about to shift our perspective rather dramatically. We've spent considerable time in the anxious mind of the watched. Now, we step into the surprisingly mundane world of the watcher. This is where things become rather interesting, in that particularly dry, bureaucratic way that makes for excellent sleep material. Picture, if you will, a different kind of morning in that same Toledo we visited earlier. The year is 1535, and we're waking not in a cramped artisan's dwelling, but in a modest yet respectable set of rooms attached to the Holy Office's headquarters. You are no longer the weaver, constantly vigilant and afraid. You are Brother Tomas de Mendoza, a Dominican friar and appointed inquisitor, and your day ahead involves considerably more paperwork than you might expect. The room where you wake is austere but comfortable, certainly more comfortable than the cells below, where accused heretics await questioning. Your bed has an actual mattress, stuffed with wool rather than straw. There's a wooden chest for your possessions, a small desk, a crucifix on the wall, and a window that looks out over the courtyard. The morning light that filters through is the same golden Castilian sunlight that illuminated our weaver's room, but it falls on a very different sort of existence. You rise at the sound of the bell calling the brothers to lauds, the morning prayer service. This is not a performance for you, not in the way it was for our weaver. Or rather, it is a performance, but one so deeply integrated into your daily routine that it feels entirely natural. You've been praying the divine office, the structured cycle of daily prayers, since you entered the Dominican order at age 15. You're now 43 years old, and these prayers have become as automatic as breathing. The rhythm of your thoughts flows along the familiar channels of Latin phrases, worn smooth by decades of repetition. After prayers, you take a simple breakfast in the refectory with the other friars. Bread, watered wine, perhaps some cheese. The conversation is quiet, focused on the day's administrative tasks rather than matters of theology. This is something that might surprise those who imagine inquisitors as wild-eyed fanatics, consumed by religious fervor. The reality is considerably more bureaucratic. The Inquisition, by your era, has become an institution, with all the tedious organizational features that term implies. You finish your breakfast and make your way to your office, a small room lined with shelves containing registers, trial records, correspondence, and theological texts. Your desk is already stacked with documents requiring attention. There are letters from the Supreme Council of the Inquisition in Madrid, providing guidance on various procedural matters. There are reports from familiars in nearby towns, detailing suspicious activities that may warrant investigation. There are depositions from recent trials that need to be reviewed and filed. There are financial accounts to examine. The Inquisition is, among other things, a self-funding operation, and the confiscation of heretics' property requires careful documentation. You settle into your chair, dip your quill in ink, and begin working through the correspondence. The first letter is from the Suprema, as the Supreme Council is called, clarifying a procedural question about the treatment of penitent heretics who have relapsed. The language is precise, legalistic, concerned with proper procedure rather than spiritual salvation. You make notes in the margin, cross-reference the letter with your manual of procedure. Every inquisitor has one. A thick volume detailing exactly how investigations should be conducted, how testimony should be recorded, what questions should be asked, in what order. This procedural meticulousness is, in its own way, rather fascinating. The Inquisition did not operate through random violence or arbitrary persecution, though it certainly could be violent and certainly did persecute. Instead, it functioned as a legal system, complete with standardized forms, evidentiary rules, and appeal processes. The trials were meant to follow specific procedures. Accused heretics had certain rights, not many, and not ones that modern jurisprudence would recognize as adequate, but more than you might expect. They could present their own witnesses. They could challenge the credibility of witnesses against them, though they weren't told who those witnesses were. They could hire advocates, though those advocates had to be approved by the Inquisition itself. The system's cruelty lay not in its randomness, but in its systematic thoroughness, in the way it transformed the detection of heresy into a bureaucratic process as routine as tax collection. And you, Brother Tomas, are a functionary in this system, neither particularly cruel nor particularly compassionate, simply doing your job with the same professional competence you might bring to any administrative position. You work through the morning's correspondence, making notes, drafting responses, filing documents. Around mid-morning, your secretary, a young friar named Brother Felipe, enters with news. A new denunciation has been received. A merchant in Toledo has been accused by his business partner of making statements suggesting Lutheran sympathies. The partner claims the merchant said that faith alone was sufficient for salvation, without the need for good works or church intercession. This is the kind of accusation that requires careful attention. Lutheranism is the great threat of your age, the heresy that has split Christendom and threatens to destabilize the entire social order. Spain has been relatively insulated from Protestant ideas, but they seep in through travelers, through books, through merchants who do business in Northern Europe. Your job is to identify these infiltrations early, before they can spread. You instruct Brother Felipe to prepare the initial paperwork. The merchant's name is recorded. The accusation is formally transcribed. Witnesses must be identified and interviewed, not just the business partner who made the accusation, but others who might have heard the merchant make similar statements. This process will take weeks, possibly months. The Inquisition does not rush. Speed suggests bias, suggests you've already reached a conclusion. The system's legitimacy depends on the appearance of thorough, impartial investigation. While Brother Felipe prepares the documents, you turn your attention to an ongoing case, A woman named Isabella de Torres has been undergoing questioning for 3 weeks now. She's accused of being a crypto-Jew, secretly maintaining Jewish practices while outwardly professing Christianity. The evidence against her is substantial. Multiple witnesses testified that she changes her linens on Saturdays, that she refuses to eat pork, that she was seen lighting candles on Friday evenings, that she turns to face the wall when she prays rather than facing the crucifix. Isabella has denied all charges. She insists she's a faithful Christian, that the witnesses are lying due to personal grudges, that the habits they describe are mere coincidences or misunderstandings. She's been questioned multiple times, her answers carefully recorded by the notary who attends all interrogations. The transcripts are remarkably detailed, questions and responses copied down verbatim, or as close to verbatim as the notary's speed allows. You review these transcripts now, searching for inconsistencies in her testimony. Did she say her grandmother died when she was 5 or when she was 7? She claimed she doesn't know any Hebrew prayers, but a witness said her grandmother used to sing to her in Hebrew. Is this something she's forgotten, or something she's deliberately concealing? The inconsistencies are small, perhaps meaningless, or perhaps they're the threads that, when pulled carefully, will unravel the fabric of her deception. The question of torture arises in your mind. Isabella has not yet been put to the question, the euphemism the Inquisition uses for judicial torture. The regulations are clear. Torture can only be applied when there is substantial evidence of guilt, but the accused refuses to confess. The purpose is not punishment, but truth-seeking, or so the legal theory claims. In practice, of course, torture produces confessions, true or false. Most people, when subjected to sufficient pain, will say whatever they believe their torturers want to hear. You're not particularly eager to order Isabella's torture. It's messy, unpleasant, and the screaming disturbs the other prisoners. But if her case drags on much longer without resolution, the Suprema will begin asking questions about your efficiency. There are quotas to meet, not explicit ones, but understood expectations. An inquisitor who never convicts anyone is clearly being too lenient. An inquisitor who convicts everyone is being too zealous. The ideal is somewhere in the middle, enough convictions to demonstrate vigilance, but not so many as to suggest you're inventing heresy where none exists. You set Isabella's file aside for now. A decision can wait another week. Perhaps additional witnesses will come forward. Perhaps she'll crack under the stress of imprisonment and confess voluntarily. Many do. The uncertainty itself becomes a kind of torture. The waiting in a dark cell with no knowledge of when or if the questioning will end. Midday arrives, and with it, dinner in the refectory. The meal is slightly more substantial than breakfast. A pottage of lentils and vegetables, bread, fish on Fridays and fast days. You eat in silence, as is the custom during communal meals, while one of the younger friars reads aloud from a theological text. Today, it's Augustine's City of God, a passage about the nature of evil and whether it exists as a positive force or merely as an absence of good. The irony of listening to abstract theological speculation about evil while you spend your days investigating and punishing it is not lost on you, though you don't allow yourself to dwell on the thought. After dinner, you have a meeting scheduled with the secular authorities. The Inquisition operates in a peculiar legal space. It's a church court, investigating religious crimes, but it relies on secular powers for enforcement. You can order arrests, but it's the secular familiars who carry them out. You can convict heretics, but it's the secular authorities who execute them. This separation allows the Church to maintain that it doesn't shed blood, a technicality that fools no one but preserves important theological principles. Today's meeting concerns logistics for the upcoming auto da fe, the public ceremony where penitent heretics will be formally reconciled to the Church and obstinate heretics will be relaxed to the secular arm, meaning turned over to secular authorities for execution. These ceremonies are elaborate affairs, carefully choreographed to maximize their didactic impact. The accused, heretics, wear sanbenitos, distinctive garments that mark their shame. They process through the streets to the plaza where a platform has been erected. Their crimes are read aloud. Those who have confessed and repented are formally reconciled. Those who refuse to recant are handed over to the secular authorities and burned. You discuss the arrangements with the city's corregidor, its chief magistrate. How many guards will be needed to maintain order? Where should the platform be positioned for maximum visibility? What time should the ceremony begin to ensure the largest crowd? These are practical questions, logistical concerns, no different from organizing any public event. The fact that the event culminates in human beings being burned alive seems not to trouble anyone at the table. This is justice, after all. This is the protection of society from spiritual corruption. The screams of the burning are the sound of evil being purged, or so you've been taught to understand them. The meeting concludes, and you return to your office. Brother Felipe has completed the initial paperwork on the merchant accused of Lutheran sympathies. You review his work, making small corrections and additions. The merchant will be summoned for an initial hearing next week. He doesn't know he's been accused yet. He's going about his daily business, perhaps feeling secure in his orthodoxy, perhaps anxiously aware that something he said might have been misinterpreted. The summons, when it arrives, will transform his life completely. But that's next week's concern. The afternoon is devoted to study. You're currently working your way through a new treatise on identifying crypto-Jews, written by a colleague in the Valencia Tribunal. The author has developed an elaborate system for detecting Jewish practices hidden under Christian disguise. He lists dozens of indicators: dietary habits, washing rituals, prayer postures, turns of phrase, naming patterns for children, business practices. Some of these indicators are genuinely rooted in Jewish law and custom. Others seem wildly speculative, guilt by association or correlation mistaken for causation. You read with professional interest, making notes on points you find useful. The treatise reflects a kind of obsessive attention to detail that characterizes the best inquisitorial minds. Nothing is too trivial to be significant. Everything is potentially evidence. The system trains you to see heresy everywhere, to interpret every deviation from standard practice as potentially meaningful. It's exhausting, in its way, this constant vigilance for signs of spiritual deviation. But it's also intellectually engaging, a puzzle to be solved, patterns to be identified within the noise of daily human behavior. As the afternoon wears on, you feel your attention beginning to wander. The treatise is dense, repetitive in places, overly fond of elaborate categorizations. Your mind drifts to other matters. There's a case from last year that still troubles you occasionally. A young woman, barely 20, accused of making a pact with the devil. The evidence was thin. A neighbor's testimony about strange lights seen in her window at night, a series of misfortunes that befell people who had quarreled with her own admission under questioning that she sometimes had impure thoughts. You'd been inclined to dismiss the charges as superstition, the kind of folk magic that the Church technically condemned but generally tolerated as harmless. But the tribunal had been under pressure from the local bishop, who was concerned about witchcraft in his diocese, and the young woman had confessed, eventually, to attending a witch's Sabbath and renouncing her baptism. The confession came after the third session of torture, when her arms had been stretched nearly to dislocation on the rack. You'd sentenced her to life imprisonment in the Inquisition's jail, a kind of mercy others had pushed for execution. She died there 8 months later, of a fever that swept through the cells that winter. You'd signed the death certificate, noted it in the records, archived her file. The system had functioned as designed. Justice had been served. And yet, sometimes, in moments like this when your attention drifts and your guard is down, you find yourself wondering whether she'd actually done anything at all, or whether she'd simply told you what you wanted to hear to make the pain stop. You shake off the thought. Doubt is not productive. Doubt serves no purpose except to undermine the important work you're doing. The Inquisition exists because heresy exists. Heresy exists because human beings are fallen, prone to error, susceptible to the devil's whispers. Your job is not to question whether the system is just. That question has been answered by greater minds than yours, by the doctors of the Church, by centuries of tradition. Your job is simply to operate the system efficiently and according to proper procedure. Evening approaches, and with it, the call to Vespers. You set aside your reading, straighten the papers on your desk, and make your way to the chapel. The evening service is shorter than the morning's, the light through the windows golden and slanting, dust motes visible in the beams. You sing the psalms with the other friars, your voice blending into the communal sound, individual identity dissolved into collective worship. This, too, is a kind of comfort. The surrender of self to something larger, the certainty that comes from following established patterns. After Vespers, there's a brief period of recreation where the friars are permitted to converse freely. You spend this time with Brother Martin, an older inquisitor who's been with the Toledo Tribunal for 20 years. He's a wealth of institutional knowledge, remember cases from decades past, can recite precedents from memory. You discuss the Isabella de Torres case with him, seeking his advice. She won't confess, Brother Martin says, his tone matter of fact. Not without stronger encouragement. I've seen hundreds of these crypto-Jew cases, the ones who maintain their innocence despite overwhelming evidence. They're the true believers, the ones who genuinely think they can practice both faiths simultaneously. They'll lie to your face and think God approves because they're protecting their secret worship. The evidence is circumstantial, you observe. Nothing definitive. Brother Martin shrugs. It's never definitive. That's the nature of secret heresy. But the pattern is clear. Multiple witnesses, multiple indicators, all pointing the same direction. Apply the question. She'll confess. They always do. You nod, though you feel a slight unease you can't quite name. Brother Martin has never been wrong in your experience. His judgments are sound, his convictions secure. If he says Isabella is guilty, she almost certainly is. And yet, that small voice of doubt whispers still, what if she isn't? But you silence the voice. Doubt is not productive. Supper is a light meal, bread, fruit, watered wine. Afterward, there's time for private prayer and reflection before Compline, the final service of the day. You retire to your room, kneel before the crucifix, and attempt to pray. The words come mechanically at first. the familiar formulae of the Pater Noster and Ave Maria. You try to penetrate beyond the words to genuine devotion, to feel the presence of God, to experience the spiritual consolation that is supposed to accompany prayer. It's been years since prayer felt like anything other than a professional obligation. This troubles you when you allow yourself to think about it. You became a friar because you genuinely believed in the religious life, because you wanted to serve God, because the alternative, marriage, children, the compromises of secular existence, seemed less authentic, less true. But somewhere along the way, the administrative demands of your position have crowded out the spiritual core. You've become more familiar with legal procedure than with mystical theology, more comfortable reading denunciations than scripture. You wonder, briefly, if this makes you a hypocrite. Spending your days investigating others' faith while your own has become dry, mechanical, a structure without substance. But then, you remind yourself that your personal spiritual state is separate from your professional duties. The validity of the Inquisition doesn't depend on the subjective religious experience of its officers. The system functions independently of your doubts or certainties. The bell rings for Compline. You make your way to the chapel one final time, recite the final prayers of the day, listen to the familiar cadences of the Latin. Nunc dimittis servum tuum, Domine. Now dismiss your servant, Lord. The words wash over you, comforting in their familiarity if not in their content. You return to your room, prepare for bed. Tomorrow will bring more paperwork, more investigations, more decisions about other people's souls. The work is endless, a great grinding machinery that processes human lives into categories: orthodox, suspect, guilty, reconciled, relaxed. You are a cog in this machinery, neither particularly large nor particularly important, simply functioning as you've been designed to function. As you lie in bed, waiting for sleep, you think about the auto da fe scheduled for next month. 3 condemned heretics will be relaxed to the secular arm. You've reviewed their cases, signed the sentences. The evidence was sufficient, the procedures properly followed. They were given opportunities to recant, to confess, to reconcile themselves with the Church. They refused. Their fate is their own choice, in a sense. The Church offers mercy to those who submit. Those who remain obstinate choose their own punishment. This logic satisfies you during daylight hours, when your mind is occupied with practical concerns. But here, in the darkness, alone with your thoughts, you sometimes wonder about the fine line between obstinacy and genuine conviction. When is refusing to confess to something you didn't do a sign of faith? And when is it heretical pride? How can you tell the difference between a crypto-Jew lying about their secret practices and an innocent converso truthfully denying false accusations? The system has answers to these questions. The system always has answers. Trust the accumulation of evidence. Trust the wisdom of multiple witnesses. Trust that torture reveals truth rather than merely producing compliance. Trust that God would not permit an innocent person to be convicted. Trust the system, and you do trust it, mostly. You have to. The alternative is to acknowledge that you've devoted your adult life to an institution that might be fundamentally unjust, that the work you do might cause more harm than good, that your careful procedures and proper protocols might be elaborate justifications for persecution. That thought is unthinkable, so you don't think it. Sleep comes eventually, bringing with it dreams that you won't remember in the morning. Tomorrow you'll wake to the bell, attend loads, eat breakfast, return to your desk and your files. Brother Felipe will bring more correspondence, more denunciations, more cases requiring attention. The machinery will continue its grinding work, processing souls, maintaining orthodoxy, protecting society from the corruption of heresy. This is your life. Brother Tomas de Mendoza, Inquisitor. Not glamorous, not particularly exciting, not even particularly evil in any dramatic sense. Simply bureaucratic, systematic, routine. You are a civil servant of the sacred, filing reports in triplicate, following procedures, meeting productivity expectations. The banality of your work is, in its way, more disturbing than dramatic cruelty would be. Systematic persecution dressed in the language of legal procedure, violence made routine, suffering converted into paperwork. But you don't think of it that way, of course. From inside the system, you're simply doing your job, and doing it well. You're protecting souls from error, defending society from corruption, maintaining the boundaries of acceptable belief. The fact that this protection involves imprisonment, torture, and execution doesn't trouble you, because you've been trained to understand these tools as necessary, as beneficial even, as the bitter medicine that cures spiritual disease. Years pass in this routine. You're promoted, eventually, to a more senior position in the tribunal. Your judgments become more confident, your procedures more efficient. You train younger inquisitors, passing on the accumulated wisdom of decades. You become, in time, someone like Brother Martin, a walking institutional memory, a repository of precedent and procedure. You're 62 years old when you finally retire from active service. Your health has declined. Decades of sitting at desks, reviewing files, have left you with chronic back pain and failing eyesight. You move to a monastery where retired Dominicans spend their final years in prayer and contemplation. You're given a cell, a small garden plot, time to finally attend to your own spiritual development. But you find, to your surprise, that prayer remains as mechanical as ever. The decades of administrative work have formed you in ways you can't undo. When you try to meditate on Scripture, your mind automatically begins analyzing it for heretical interpretations. When you attend Mass, you find yourself evaluating the priest's orthodoxy rather than participating in the worship. You've spent so long policing others' faith that you've forgotten how to simply have your own. On warm afternoons, you sit in the garden, feeling the sun on your face, listening to birds, watching insects move through the flowers. These simple experiences of being alive, of existing in a body in a particular moment, these are, you realize, what you've missed during all those years in your office. While you were categorizing souls and filing reports, life was happening elsewhere, to other people. You die quietly one winter morning, having received last rites, having confessed your sins to a young friar who seems barely old enough to shave. Your confession is brief, minor lapses in observing the monastic rules, occasional impatience with your fellow friars, nothing significant. You don't confess doubts about the work you spent your life doing. Those aren't sins exactly. Or if they are, you're not quite ready to name them as such. Your body is buried in the monastery cemetery. Your name is added to the long list of deceased brethren, to be read aloud during prayers for the dead. Your files, your cases, your carefully documented investigations, these remain in the archives of the Toledo Tribunal, gathering dust, occasionally consulted by future inquisitors seeking precedent. This is your legacy. Paperwork, procedure, the systematic application of religious law to human lives. And now, dear listener, we've completed our journey through the Inquisitor's daily routine. Perhaps you're noticing that the real horror of the system lay not in dramatic cruelty, but in its mundane efficiency. in the way normal people could participate in persecution simply by doing their jobs competently. There were no monsters here, only civil servants. No demons, only bureaucrats. The machinery of oppression ran on paperwork and procedure, on the assumption that following proper channels somehow sanctified the outcomes. As you drift towards sleep, consider the relief of not being responsible for other people's souls. The burden of judgment, the weight of playing God. You're free of these. Your modern anxieties are real and valid, but they don't include the cosmic responsibility of determining who deserves salvation and who merits the flames. Rest in that freedom. Let the image of Brother Tomas fade into history's shadows, his world of reports and interrogations, torture and execution, all conducted with bureaucratic calm. Let it dissolve like a bad dream upon waking. We'll meet again for our third segment, where we'll explore the mysteries hidden in the gaps of history, in the trial records that were lost or deliberately destroyed. But that investigation awaits. For now, sleep beckons with its promise of unconsciousness, that blessed state where no one keeps files on your thoughts and dreams. Drift away. The past cannot reach you here. And so we arrive, patient traveler, at the most intriguing part of our journey, the silences in the historical record, the absences that speak as loudly as any preserved testimony. If you're still awake, congratulations on your resilience. If you're drifting pleasantly between consciousness and sleep, even better. We're now entering territory that's part detective story, part meditation on the nature of historical memory, and entirely designed to send you gently into oblivion. Picture yourself not in Toledo or any specific city, but in a kind of liminal space, an archive, perhaps, though not a real one. This is the archive of what might have been, the phantom library of documents that once existed, but do so no longer. The shelves stretch endlessly in every direction, but they're empty, or nearly so. Here and there, you see a scattered page, a fragment of testimony, the charred corner of a trial record. Everything else is absence. This is where we must begin our investigation, with what's missing. The Spanish Inquisition, for all its meticulous record-keeping, has left us with a historical record that's remarkably incomplete. Thousands of trials were conducted over the institution's 350-year existence, yet the surviving documentation is fragmentary, inconsistent, and in many cases suspiciously absent. Some of this absence is the simple work of time. Documents decay, archives burn, paper deteriorates, but some of it is more deliberate, more troubling. Records were destroyed, testimony was altered, confessions were rewritten. The gaps in the archive are not random. They follow patterns that suggest conscious editorial intervention. Let us consider what we do have, first, before exploring what we don't. The Inquisition's surviving records include trial transcripts, correspondence between local tribunals and the Suprema, financial accounts, procedural manuals, denunciations, and the records of auto da fe. These documents are housed primarily in the National Historical Archive in Madrid, with smaller collections scattered across former Inquisition tribunal cities, Toledo, Seville, Valencia, Zaragoza, and others. Scholars who work with these records describe an experience that's both fascinating and frustrating. You might find a detailed transcript of a trial's first 3 sessions, then nothing for the next 6 months, then a final sentence with no explanation of how it was reached. You might find letters referring to the matter we discussed previously, but no record of what that matter was. You might find financial records showing that a particular prisoner was held for 2 years, but no trial transcript explaining what they were accused of or whether they were ultimately convicted. These gaps create a kind of historical vertigo. We can see the outlines of events, but the details remain maddeningly unclear. It's like trying to reconstruct a conversation by reading every third word. You get a sense of the general topic, but the nuance, the specifics, the actual meaning, these remain elusive. Consider the case of Maria de Casala, tried for alumbradismo, a mystical heresy that involved claims of direct communication with God without church mediation, in Toledo in 1532. Her trial transcript survives, and it's a remarkable document. Over the course of multiple sessions, Maria eloquently defends her spiritual experiences, arguing that her visions and direct encounters with the divine are genuine rather than heretical. The transcript shows her to be educated, articulate, theologically sophisticated. She quotes scripture, cites church fathers, constructs logical arguments against her accusers. And then, abruptly, the transcript ends. We know from other sources that she was eventually acquitted, which was itself unusual. The Inquisition rarely acquitted anyone. But we don't have the final sessions of her trial. We don't know what arguments finally convinced the inquisitors of her orthodoxy. We don't know if there was political pressure involved, or if her social connections protected her, or if the tribunal genuinely concluded that her experiences were within the bounds of acceptable mysticism. The absence of those final sessions changes how we interpret the entire case. Without them, we can't know whether Maria's acquittal represents the Inquisition occasionally getting things right, or whether it represents the power of social class to shield someone from consequences that a peasant with identical beliefs would have faced. The gap in the record isn't just an inconvenience for historians. It's a fundamental obstacle to understanding what actually happened. Now, multiply this frustration by thousands. Thousands of cases with similar gaps, similar absences, similar tantalizing fragments that raise more questions than they answer. The archive becomes a kind of puzzle, with most of its pieces missing, and, crucially, with no way to know which pieces are missing by accident and which were deliberately removed. Let us drift now into the more speculative territory. Why were certain records destroyed or hidden? The conventional explanation is simple. Fire, decay, neglect, the ordinary entropy that affects all historical documents. Archives burned during wars. Documents were discarded when buildings changed hands. Paper deteriorated in damp storage conditions. All of this is true, and all of it accounts for some of the gaps. But there are patterns in the absences that suggest more deliberate curation. Records of trials involving prominent individuals or powerful families are disproportionately missing. Cases that might have been politically embarrassing to the Church or the Spanish Crown are underrepresented in the surviving documentation. Trials that ended in acquittals, which would have provided evidence that the Inquisition sometimes erred, sometimes falsely accused, these are particularly scarce. Consider what we know about the trial of Archbishop Bartolomé Carranza, one of the highest-ranking church officials ever investigated by the Inquisition. Carranza was accused of Protestant sympathies in 1559, largely because of a book he'd written about Christian doctrine that his enemies claimed contained heretical ideas. His trial became a massive political struggle, involving the Spanish crown, the papacy, and various factions within the Spanish Church. The trial lasted 17 years, during which Carranza was imprisoned and repeatedly interrogated. The case produced mountains of documentation, theological treatises written in his defense, denunciations from his enemies, testimony from dozens of witnesses, correspondence between Spain and Rome. And yet, substantial portions of this documentation are missing. The surviving records are enough to tell us the basic outline of the story, but crucial details remain obscure. Was Carranza actually guilty of heresy, or was he the victim of political intrigue? The surviving evidence can support either interpretation, which is itself suspicious. A complete record would presumably resolve the question definitively. The incompleteness allows both sides to claim vindication, which is convenient for everyone except historians trying to understand what actually happened. As you lie there, feeling your consciousness drift like a boat on gentle water, imagine yourself as an archivist in the year 1600, tasked with organizing the Inquisition's records. You come across documents that are politically sensitive, that implicate powerful people, that might damage the institution's reputation if they became public. What do you do? Do you preserve them faithfully, trusting that truth matters more than convenience? Or do you make certain documents disappear, telling yourself that you're protecting the church, maintaining order, serving a greater good? The answer, if we're honest, is that many archivists chose the latter option. Documents were lost. Files were misplaced. Sensitive materials were relocated to private collections where they could be controlled more carefully. This wasn't necessarily malicious. These archivists likely believed they were doing the right thing, protecting the institution they served. But the effect was to create a historical record that's been systematically sanitized, with the most troubling and complicated cases carefully excised. Let us turn now to a specific category of missing documents: the confessions extracted under torture. We know torture was used extensively by the Inquisition. The procedural manuals describe exactly how it should be applied, what implements should be used, how long sessions should last. We have financial records showing payments to the torturers. We have architectural evidence of the torture chambers themselves. We have, in short, abundant evidence that torture happened. What we don't have, in most cases, is the actual testimony produced under torture. The trial transcripts typically include statements like, "The accused was put to the question and confessed to the following heresies," followed by a list of crimes. But the transcripts don't include the process of the torture itself. They don't describe what was done to the accused, how long it lasted, what exactly was said during those sessions. This absence is deliberate. The Inquisition was legally required to extract confessions, but it was also aware that confessions obtained through torture were problematic. They might be unreliable. They might reveal the brutality of the process in ways that would undermine the system's legitimacy. So the torture sessions were recorded separately from the main trial transcript, and those separate records were much less likely to be preserved. The effect is to sanitize the trial transcripts, to make them seem more like rational legal proceedings and less like exercises in breaking human beings through applied pain. You read the transcript and see a confession presented as though it were given freely, voluntarily. The violence that produced it has been edited out, relegated to documents that have conveniently disappeared. Imagine, if you will, reading the confession of someone accused of Judaizing, secretly practicing Judaism. The transcript says, "The accused confessed to lighting candles on Friday evenings, refusing to eat pork, and teaching Hebrew prayers to her children." It's presented as a simple statement of fact. But behind those words lies a scene of horror. A woman strapped to a rack, her limbs being pulled slowly until joints begin to separate. Pain radiating through her body in waves, the inquisitors calmly asking their questions, waiting for her screams to subside enough that she can speak, recording her words. That scene doesn't appear in the transcript. It's been erased, or rather, it was never included in the first place. The violence is present only as an absence, a gap in the record that changes everything about how we interpret what follows. As your breathing slows and deepens, as the boundary between waking and sleeping becomes increasingly permeable, consider what else might be hidden in these gaps. How many people were falsely accused? How many confessed to things they never did simply to make the pain stop? How many cases involved personal vendettas disguised as religious zeal? The surviving records can't tell us, because the records themselves have been curated to tell a particular story, the story of a just institution defending the faith against genuine threats. But there are clues in the margins, suggestions in what survives that point toward what's missing. There are records of people who recanted their confessions, claiming they'd only confessed under duress. These recantations are brief, usually followed by notes indicating that the person was tortured again until they reaffirmed their original confession. The system had an answer for everything, a procedure to handle every complication. The machinery ground on, producing the outcomes it was designed to produce, and the records reflect that designed inevitability. Let us consider now a different kind of absence, the voices of the accused themselves. Most trial transcripts are written from the inquisitor's perspective, recording questions and answers, but providing little sense of the accused person's actual experience. The words are theirs, technically, but they've been filtered through the notary's transcription, shaped by the inquisitor's questions, constrained by the knowledge that everything said might be used as evidence of guilt. Very rarely, we find documents that offer glimpses of the accused person's subjectivity, letters they wrote from prison, for instance, or autobiographical statements they were permitted to submit. These documents are precious to historians because they're so rare. They show us people trying to explain themselves, to assert their innocence, to maintain some sense of dignity and selfhood in the face of an institution designed to strip both away. And yet even these documents are problematic. They were written knowing that inquisitors would read them. They were crafted strategically to present the accused in the most favorable possible light. The performance of innocence, the claims of orthodoxy. How can we know what's genuine and what's calculated for survival? The institutional context contaminates the evidence. We can never access the accused person's true thoughts and feelings, only the version of themselves they chose to present to their persecutors. There's a philosophical question lurking here, one that might help ease you into sleep if you're still stubbornly conscious. Can we ever truly know historical truth, or only the stories that power chose to preserve? The archive isn't a neutral repository of facts. It's a constructed narrative, shaped by countless decisions about what to keep and what to discard. The Inquisition's records tell us as much about what the institution wanted us to know as about what actually happened. And this, perhaps, is the deepest mystery, not the specific question of which documents were destroyed, but the broader question of whether any historical archive can be trusted to represent reality, rather than merely representing what those in power wished reality to be. Drift now through the empty library of lost documents. See the shelves that once held testimony from thousands of voices, now reduced to silence. The woman who claimed to see visions, What exactly did she see? The converso merchant accused of secret Jewish practice. Was he guilty, or was it a business rival seeking to destroy him? The village priest accused of solicitation in the confessional. How many women came forward, and what happened to them afterward? The Moriscos, converted Muslims, forced to abandon their language, their customs, their names. What did they whisper to their children at night? And how long did those memories persist before they were finally extinguished? We'll never know. The documents that might have told us are gone, burned or rotted or deliberately destroyed. What remains is enough to sketch the outlines of the story, but not enough to fully understand it. We know that thousands suffered. We know that many were innocent of any genuine crime. We know that the system perpetuated itself through fear and procedural momentum rather than through any genuine discovery of heresy. But the specific human experiences, the individual lives crushed by this machinery, these remain largely hidden, obscured by the strategic absences in the historical record. Let me share with you one particularly haunting absence. In 1680, a massive auto da fe was held in Madrid, attended by the king and queen, with over 100 prisoners reconciled and 21 relaxed to the secular arm for execution. The ceremony was elaborately documented. We have descriptions of the platform built for the occasion, lists of who attended, accounts of the processions and speeches. What we don't have are the trial records for most of the condemned. We know their names. We know what they were accused of. Most were accused of Judaizing, of being crypto-Jews. We know they were executed. But we don't know the specific evidence against them. We don't know whether they confessed or maintained their innocence. We don't know if they recanted at the end or died asserting their faith. The spectacle was preserved. The substance was erased. 21 people burned alive, and we know almost nothing about them, except that the state deemed them expendable. They've become abstract symbols rather than human beings with histories, families, hopes, fears. The archive has reduced them to names on a list, a footnote in the history of spectacular violence. This is what archives do when we let them. They transform human suffering into data points, lived experience into bureaucratic notation. The messiness of actual lives, the complexity of real human motivation, the ambiguity of most moral situations, all of this gets flattened into categorical simplicity. Guilty or innocent, orthodox or heretic, saved or damned. As you sink deeper toward sleep, let these absences wash over you. The unanswered questions, the voices silenced, the stories incomplete. Allow them to become a kind of white noise, soothing in their very incompleteness. There's something almost restful about historical mystery, about accepting that some things simply cannot be known. The anxiety of certainty, the burden of complete knowledge, you're free of these. The past keeps its secrets. Consider the archivists of future centuries examining records of our own era. What will they find missing? What have we chosen not to document or documented but carefully hidden? What systematic biases shape our own record-keeping, making certain lives visible while rendering others invisible? The Inquisition seems monstrous from our vantage point, but future historians might view our own institutions with similar horror, and they'll face similar frustrations when they discover that the most damning documents have mysteriously disappeared. Every archive is also an anti-archive, a record of what was deemed unworthy of recording. Every preserved document implies 1,000 others that were discarded. History is not what happened, but what someone chose to remember and record. The rest is silence, And, speaking of silence, let us return to those lost trial records one final time. Imagine if they were suddenly discovered, a forgotten vault beneath an old Inquisition building, documents perfectly preserved by some miracle of climate control. What would they reveal? Would they confirm our worst assumptions about the institution, or complicate them? Would we find evidence of more cruelty than we imagined, or more mercy? Would the accused people emerge as fully human, or would the institutional language have already transformed them into categories? The historian in me wants those documents to exist, to have the gaps filled, to know definitively what happened. But there's another part, the part that recognizes the value of acknowledging limits, that finds something appropriate in the incompleteness. The Inquisition specialized in extracting confessions, in forcing people to make their inner lives transparent to institutional scrutiny. Perhaps it's fitting that the institution itself remains partially opaque to us, that we can't fully know it despite our archival investigations. What we can know is enough. We know that the system operated for centuries, processing thousands of lives, destroying many, damaging most. We know that it claimed to serve truth, but frequently served power instead. We know that it presented itself as protecting souls, but often protected institutional authority and social hierarchy. We know that ordinary people, scribes, notaries, torturers, witnesses, participated in systematic persecution simply by showing up for work and doing their jobs competently. These knowns are sufficient. The unknowns, the gaps, the silences, these don't exonerate the institution or minimize its impact. If anything, they suggest that what we know about is merely the tip of a larger iceberg of suffering, that the documented cases represent only a fraction of the total harm, as consciousness slips away from you now, as the boundary between waking and dreaming dissolves entirely. Let the archive fade, the empty shelves, the charred documents, the testimony that was never recorded. Let it all recede into the comfortable darkness behind your closed eyes. You're not responsible for recovering what was lost. You're not obligated to solve historical mysteries. These are burdens for researchers to carry, not for you. Your task, dear listener, is simpler: to recognize the past's complexity, acknowledge its horrors, and then release it. Let it remain in the past where it belongs. The Inquisition is over. The trials are finished. The prisoners are all long dead, their suffering concluded. What remains is memory, incomplete and imperfect, but memory nonetheless. And memory, unlike lived experience, can be set aside. It can be examined and then released. It can be acknowledged without being inhabited. This is the mercy that distance provides, the ability to learn from the past without being consumed by it. The mystery of the lost trial records will remain a mystery. Some questions don't have answers. Some gaps can't be filled. And that's acceptable. That's even perhaps appropriate. Not everything needs to be known. Not every silence needs to be filled with speech. Rest now in the unknowing. Let the archive close. The documents, present and absent, require nothing more from you. Your breathing has slowed. Your body has relaxed. The boundary between yourself and sleep is barely perceptible now. Just a bit further, just a bit deeper. The mysteries of history are fading. The questions are dissolving. All that remains is the gentle darkness of sleep, welcoming and warm, asking nothing of you except that you surrender to it. Let go. The past cannot harm you here. Welcome back, persistent consciousness. If you've made it this far, either you're genuinely interested in the ironies of historical privilege, or you possess a remarkable resistance to somnolence. Either way, we're now ascending from the dungeons and archives into sunlight. Metaphorical sunlight, at least. We're climbing the social ladder to observe how those who orchestrated the system of fear lived in circumstances that were, shall we say, notably different from those they imposed on others. There's something almost darkly comedic about the contrast we're about to explore, though comedy isn't quite the right word. Perhaps ironic is better, or hypocritical, or simply human, that most complicated of descriptors. Let us begin not in Toledo this time, but in the much grander setting of Seville in the year 1550. Imagine yourself standing outside a magnificent palace, though it's not called a palace. That would be too worldly. It's the residence of the Archbishop of Seville, and it happens to be palatial in scale and grandeur. But that's merely because the church must maintain appropriate dignity. The building is 3 stories of honey-colored stone, with interior courtyards featuring fountains and lemon trees, galleries with painted ceilings, and windows overlooking carefully manicured gardens. This is where Archbishop Fernando Valdez resides, the same Fernando Valdez who happens to also serve as the Inquisitor General of Spain, the supreme head of the entire Inquisition apparatus. His dual role is not unusual. High church office and Inquisition authority frequently overlapped. The men who judged heretics were the same men who lived in the greatest luxury the church could provide. Let us drift through the morning routine of such a man, observing the pleasant distance between his life and the lives of those subject to his authority. The Archbishop wakes not to harsh bells in a shared dormitory, but to the quiet sound of his personal servant drawing back the curtains of his private bedchamber. The room is spacious, the bed itself a masterpiece of carpentry, with carved posts and heavy velvet curtains that kept out draughts during the night. The linens are fine, changed frequently by servants whose job it is to maintain the Archbishop's comfort. The morning light that enters the room is filtered through expensive glass, clear glass, not the oiled cloth of common homes, offering an unobstructed view of the garden below. The Archbishop rises, and his morning ablutions are attended by servants who bring warmed water in silver ewers, clean towels of soft linen, and all the various implements of personal grooming. There is a luxury here that's difficult for modern sensibilities to fully appreciate. The sheer comfort of not having to do everything yourself, of having other people whose entire purpose is to make your life pleasant and easy. The Archbishop doesn't fetch his own water, doesn't light his own fires, doesn't even dress himself entirely without assistance. The complex layers of ecclesiastical clothing require help to don properly. He descends to his private chapel for morning prayers, not the communal prayers in a shared church, but a personal devotion in a space dedicated solely to his spiritual needs. The chapel is beautiful, decorated with fine artwork, the altar appointed with silver candlesticks and embroidered cloths. A chaplain is already there, ready to say Mass specifically for the Archbishop and his household. The Archbishop kneels on a cushion, note the cushion, not bare stone, and recites his prayers with the ease of long practice. After Mass, breakfast is served in his private dining room. And here's where the contrast becomes particularly striking. While the people subject to the Inquisition's scrutiny were being watched for signs of suspicious eating habits, refusing pork, changing linens on Saturday, avoiding shellfish, the Archbishop sits down to a meal that would be remarkable in any era. There's fresh bread, naturally, but also butter and honey, cheese from the Archbishop's own estates, fruit preserved from last season's harvest, cold meat, and wine. The wine alone would cost more than a laborer's monthly wages. The archbishop eats from dishes of fine pottery or even silver, uses utensils of good quality, has servants attending to refill his cup and bring additional courses as needed. He eats, in short, like a prince, which in many ways he is, a prince of the church, with temporal authority to match his spiritual position. After breakfast, the archbishop retires to his study to attend to correspondence and administrative matters. But notice the difference between this study and Brother Tomas's office from our earlier segment. This room is large, well lit from multiple windows, lined with shelves containing not just legal documents, but an impressive personal library. Theology, certainly, but also classical literature, history, poetry. There are comfortable chairs, a large desk of polished wood, decorative objects scattered about that serve no practical purpose, but speak to refined taste and considerable wealth. The archbishop sits and reviews reports from various Inquisition tribunals under his authority. One report describes a recent auto da fe in Córdoba, where 3 crypto-Jews were relaxed to the secular arm. Another discusses financial matters. The Inquisition has confiscated a wealthy merchant's property, and there are questions about how to distribute the proceeds. A third involves a procedural dispute between 2 inquisitors who disagree about whether to proceed with a particular case. The archbishop reads these reports with professional detachment, making notes, drafting instructions. He is genuinely concerned with maintaining the purity of the faith, genuinely believes that the Inquisition serves a vital function. But the connection between this belief and the actual suffering involved is abstract, mediated through bureaucratic language. He reads that 3 people were burned alive, and what he processes is, the Córdoba tribunal is functioning effectively. Productivity is satisfactory. The human cost, the screaming, the smell of burning flesh, the families destroyed, this doesn't penetrate. Not because the archbishop is a monster, but because the system is designed to insulate those at the top from the consequences of their decisions. Distance and abstraction do their work. The suffering is real, but it happens elsewhere to other people, and it's described in language that sanitizes and depersonalizes. Around mid-morning, the archbishop receives visitors, other church officials, wealthy lay people seeking his favor, municipal authorities coordinating on various matters. These meetings take place in a formal receiving room, beautifully appointed, with chairs arranged to establish hierarchy. The archbishop sits slightly elevated, a subtle reminder of status. Servants offer refreshments, wine, small cakes, fruit. The conversations are cordial, political, sometimes delicate. There's discussion of appointments to various positions, of disputes that need the archbishop's mediation, of financial matters involving church property. The Inquisition comes up, but only glancingly. No one wants to dwell on unpleasant topics. Instead, there's emphasis on the institution's importance in maintaining social order, protecting the realm from foreign heresy, ensuring that Spain remains the most purely Catholic nation in Christendom. One visitor, a wealthy converso merchant, comes seeking the archbishop's help. His cousin has been arrested by the Inquisition, accused of Judaizing. The merchant insists his cousin is innocent, that the accusations stem from a business rivalry, that false testimony has been procured. He's brought a substantial gift for the church's charitable works, he's careful to specify, though everyone understands it's a bribe. The archbishop accepts the gift graciously and promises to look into the matter. will he actually help? Perhaps. If the merchant is sufficiently well-connected, if the case is politically sensitive enough, if intervention serves the Archbishop's interests, then yes, a quiet word might be passed to the tribunal, suggesting that the case should be handled with particular care. The system has flexibility for those who can afford to access it. Justice, even inquisitorial justice, bends for wealth and power. After the morning's meetings conclude, the Archbishop takes a walk in his garden. This is his time for contemplation and fresh air, though fresh is relative. Even Seville's gardens can't entirely escape the smell of the city. But it's pleasant here, with the sound of fountains, the scent of orange blossoms in season, the play of light through leaves. Gardeners maintain the space, but they make themselves unobtrusive when the Archbishop walks. He has the illusion of solitude, though he's never truly alone. As he walks, does he think about the people in Inquisition cells? Does he imagine their conditions, the darkness, the dampness, the inadequate food, the uncertainty? Probably not. The human mind is remarkably good at compartmentalization, at holding contradictory realities in separate chambers without allowing them to touch. The Archbishop can genuinely believe he's serving God while also enjoying luxuries that Christ explicitly condemned. He can order investigations that will lead to torture and execution while savoring the excellent wine from his estates. These things don't contradict each other in his mind because he's constructed a world-view where they fit together perfectly. Midday brings dinner, the main meal of the day, and it's a substantial affair. The Archbishop dines sometimes alone, sometimes with guests, but always well. There are multiple courses, soup, fish or meat, vegetables prepared with skill, bread, pastries, fruit, wine throughout. The meals are social occasions even when taken alone, opportunities to think, to plan, to enjoy the sensory pleasures of good food and drink. Compare this to the meals eaten by prisoners in Inquisition cells, a piece of bread, perhaps some thin gruel, water that's questionable at best. The contrast is so stark that it becomes almost abstract. How can these two realities exist simultaneously? How can the Archbishop enjoy his roasted capon with herbs, while people under his authority are starving in cells? The answer is simple. Out of sight, out of mind. The prisoners are elsewhere, and elsewhere might as well be another world entirely. After dinner, the afternoon stretches out with its own rhythms. Perhaps there's more administrative work, correspondence to write, reports to review, decisions to make. Perhaps there's time for reading, for studying theological texts or working on a sermon. The Archbishop is expected to preach occasionally, and he takes this responsibility seriously. His sermons are learned affairs, full of classical references and sophisticated theology, delivered to congregations that include the city's elite. Does he preach about poverty, about humility, about Christ's solidarity with the suffering? Probably. These are standard sermon topics. But the irony of preaching poverty while living in luxury doesn't strike him because, in his understanding, his wealth isn't really his. It belongs to the Church. He's merely its steward. He lives well not for personal enjoyment, but to maintain the dignity of his office. This rationalization is genuinely believed, sincerely held. Self-deception is one of humanity's most reliable talents. As evening approaches, the Archbishop might receive more visitors or attend some social function. There are dinners with other church officials, meetings with civic leaders, cultural events that require his presence. The Archbishop moves through Seville's elite social circles with ease, welcomed everywhere, deferred to by everyone. His power is substantial, ecclesiastical, political, social. People seek his favor, fear his displeasure, compete for his attention. In all of these interactions, the Inquisition hovers as background presence. Everyone knows of the Archbishop's role as Inquisitor General. This knowledge colors every conversation, every relationship. People are careful around him, measuring their words, avoiding topics that might suggest heterodoxy. His very presence creates a zone of enforced orthodoxy. But this suits him fine. He believes orthodoxy is correct, that deviation is dangerous, that his authority serves to protect people from their own worst impulses. Supper is lighter than dinner, but still ample. Bread, cheese, fruit, wine. The Archbishop eats in his private chambers, perhaps reviewing documents or simply sitting quietly, looking out over the garden as evening shadows lengthen. These are moments of peace, of satisfaction. He's had a productive day, served the church well, maintained his responsibilities with diligence. His conscience is clear. He sleeps well, untroubled by the suffering his institution causes, because in his framework that suffering is necessary, regrettable perhaps, but ultimately merciful. Better to suffer briefly in this life and be corrected than to die in heresy and suffer eternally. The bed where he sleeps is comfortable, the room is secure, the night is quiet. This is privilege, pure and undiluted. Not just material comfort, though that's certainly present, but the deeper privilege of being insulated from the consequences of one's actions, of making decisions about other people's lives without having to witness or experience the results. Let us expand our view now, drifting across the landscape of Inquisition-Era Spain to observe the broader patterns of this privilege. The Archbishop of Seville is one example, but the pattern repeats across every level of church hierarchy. Bishops live well. Cathedral canons live well. Even ordinary parish priests, while not wealthy by aristocratic standards, live better than their parishioners. They have secure housing, reliable income, social status, and the authority that comes with representing the Church. The Inquisition itself, as an institution, is remarkably well funded. It operates on a combination of royal support and its own income from confiscated property. When a heretic is convicted, their property is seized, homes, businesses, savings, everything. Some of this goes to the royal treasury, some to the Inquisition itself. The system creates a perverse incentive. Wealthy heretics are particularly profitable to convict. The institution that claims to serve spiritual ends is materially enriched by the suffering it causes. This isn't secret or hidden. It's openly acknowledged, justified with theological arguments about how heretics forfeit their right to property by abandoning the faith. But notice how this works in practice. The wealthy converso merchant we mentioned earlier, seeking the Archbishop's help for his cousin. His substantial gift might indeed help his cousin, but it also feeds the same system that imprisoned the cousin in the first place. The Church profits whether someone is convicted or acquitted, whether they're guilty or innocent. It's a remarkably efficient arrangement, if you're the one benefiting from it. Let us visit briefly a different sort of privileged church official, not an archbishop, but a cardinal in Rome who occasionally involves himself in Inquisition matters. His palace makes the archbishop's residence look modest by comparison. Multiple courtyards, frescoed ceilings, marble everywhere. Gardens that require dozens of workers to maintain. A private art collection that includes works by the finest Renaissance masters. He dines with ambassadors and princes, involves himself in the highest levels of church politics. lives a life of such refinement that it's barely recognizable as belonging to a minister of a religion founded by a homeless preacher. This cardinal receives reports from Spain about Inquisition activities, and he responds with carefully calibrated instructions. Be firm, but not excessive. Maintain order, but avoid scandal. Remember that the ultimate goal is the salvation of souls, even if the means involve regrettable necessities. His language is diplomatic, abstract, designed to maintain plausible deniability. He's not ordering torture exactly. He's simply authorizing inquisitors to use whatever means are deemed appropriate to extract the truth. If truth extraction happens to involve the rack, well, that's a local implementation detail. The cardinal sleeps soundly, too. He's even further removed from the actual suffering than the archbishop. It happens in another country, reported to him in sanitized language, reduced to statistics and summaries. 3 burnings this month, 14 reconciliations, property confiscated totaling X amount. It's not about people. It's about numbers, procedures, administrative efficiency. And yet, these men, the archbishop, the cardinal, the bishops and canons, they're not monsters. They're humans, capable of kindness to those in their immediate circle, genuinely devout in their own understanding, sometimes even charitably inclined. The cardinal might maintain hospitals, fund orphanages, patronize artists and scholars. The archbishop might be beloved by his servants, generous to his family, thoughtful in his spiritual guidance to those who seek his counsel. The contradiction is held without apparent strain, cruelty at a distance, compassion up close, systematic persecution of abstractions called heretics, personal kindness to individual humans who don't fall into that category. It's the same compartmentalization we observed earlier, but at a larger scale, with more resources to maintain the separation. As your consciousness drifts now, and surely you must be drifting by this point, consider how this pattern persists beyond the Inquisition, beyond this particular historical moment. Systems of privilege always work this way, insulating those who benefit from having to confront the human cost of their advantages. Distance is maintained, physical distance, social distance, linguistic distance. The suffering happens elsewhere, to other people, and it's described in language that obscures rather than illuminates. The archbishop never visits an Inquisition cell, never witnesses a torture session, never attends an execution. He doesn't need to. His decisions are implemented by others, the unpleasantness handled at a remove, leaving him free to enjoy his garden and his wine and his clear conscience. This is how systems of oppression sustain themselves, not through the dramatic cruelty of individual monsters, but through the comfortable compartmentalization of ordinary people who benefit from the system and choose not to look too closely at its foundations. Let us drift now through the decades, watching as generations of church officials come and go, each living in similar comfort, each maintaining similar distance from the suffering their institution causes. The faces change, but the pattern remains constant. Young men enter the church hierarchy and rise through the ranks, acquiring along the way not just authority, but material comfort, social status, and the subtle corruptions that come with privilege. They start, perhaps, with genuine idealism, a desire to serve God, to shepherd souls, to make the world more holy. But the system they enter has its own logic, its own incentives, its own way of reshaping those who operate within it. To succeed, you must accept certain premises. You must believe, or at least act as though you believe, that the Inquisition serves a necessary function. You must be willing to sign documents ordering investigations, approving interrogations, authorizing punishments. You must do these things without visiting the cells, witnessing the torture, or attending the burnings. And in exchange for your cooperation, you receive what? Comfort, certainly. Security, status, the profound satisfaction of believing you're on the right side, defending truth against error, protecting society from corruption. These rewards are substantial, more than adequate to purchase compliance. Most people, offered this exchange, would take it. Most people across history have taken it. The truly unsettling realization is that these privileged church officials weren't aberrations or exceptions. They were normal. Given the same circumstances, the same incentives, the same cultural framework, most of us would have made similar choices. We'd like to think we'd be different, that we'd see through the system's logic, that we'd resist. But the evidence of history suggests otherwise. Privilege is comfortable, and comfort is seductive, and most humans, when offered the choice between comfort and moral clarity, choose comfort. As evening deepens into night, both in our historical tour and in your present moment, let us observe one final scene. The Archbishop, now elderly, lies in his comfortable bed for the last time. He's dying, attended by physicians and priests, surrounded by concerned subordinates. He receives the last rites with appropriate piety. He confesses his sins, minor infractions, mostly, nothing serious. He believes he's lived a good life, served God well, fulfilled his responsibilities faithfully. Does he think, in these final moments, about the people who suffered because of decisions he made? The families separated, the innocent convicted, the prisoners who died in his cells? Probably not. Or if he does, he frames it differently, as regrettable necessities, as the price of maintaining orthodoxy, as suffering that served a greater good. His conscience remains clear because he successfully maintained the compartmentalization until the very end. He dies peacefully, is buried with honor in the cathedral, is remembered in prayers and commemorations. His successor moves into the palace, sits at the same desk, makes similar decisions, maintains the same comfortable distance. The machinery grinds on, powered by human choices but seeming almost independent of them, as if it operates according to some autonomous logic. But it doesn't, of course. Systems are made of human decisions, human choices, human willingness to not look too closely at uncomfortable truths. The Inquisition persisted for centuries not because it was inevitable, but because generation after generation of church officials chose to maintain it, found it served their interests, and enjoyed the privileges it helped secure. And now, dear listener, we've come full circle through our 4 segments. We've experienced the fear of those watched, observed the bureaucratic routines of those watching, explored the mysteries hidden in absent records, and witnessed the comfortable privilege of those who orchestrated the entire system. The pattern that emerges is one of systematic separation between suffering and comfort, between power and accountability, between the rhetoric of faith and the reality of institutional self-interest. This is the texture of life under the Inquisition: fear for most, routine for some, luxury for a few at the top, a hierarchy of experience, carefully maintained with each level insulated from full awareness of the others. The system worked not despite these separations, but because of them. Distance made cruelty possible. Abstraction made it bearable. Privilege made it profitable. As you drift now toward sleep, and surely sleep must be very close, after this long journey through history's uncomfortable corridors, let the images fade. The archbishop in his garden, the inquisitor at his desk, the prisoner in their cell, the documents missing from the archive. Let them all recede into the past where they belong. You're here now, in a time and place where no one monitors your prayers, tallies your orthodoxy, or confiscates your property for suspected heresy. Whatever anxieties you carry, and you surely carry some, everyone does. They're different anxieties, born of different systems, shaped by different powers. But you're not subject to the Inquisition. That particular machinery has been dismantled, its power broken, its logic discredited. The past we've toured tonight exists only as memory, as cautionary tale, as reminder of how systems of oppression function, and why eternal vigilance matters. But it cannot harm you. It has no power in your present except what you grant it through attention. And so, let your attention drift away. Let the history lesson end. Let the ironies and contradictions and comfortable hypocrisies of long-dead church officials fade into insignificance. They had their time. Their world is gone. What remains is the lesson, and you've learned it. Now rest. The rhythm of your breathing, slow and steady. The weight of your body, relaxed and heavy. The darkness behind your closed eyes, deep and welcoming. These are your reality now. Not Toledo or Seville or Rome in the 16th century, but here, now, this moment of quiet transition between waking and sleeping. Let go. Release the past. Surrender to the present, which in this case means surrendering to sleep's inevitable pull. Just a bit further, just a bit deeper, the journey is nearly complete. And so we arrive at the end of our peculiar pilgrimage, through Inquisition-Era faith and fear. If you're still conscious enough to hear these words, well, we've either failed entirely in our mission to ease you into sleep, or you've found the content genuinely engaging enough to resist somnolence. Either way, let us gently wrap up our exploration with some final thoughts before releasing you into the night. We've walked through 4 distinct landscapes tonight. First, the suffocating atmosphere of daily life under surveillance, where every word mattered and fear was as constant as breathing. We felt the weight of that vigilance, the exhausting performance of perpetual orthodoxy, the way suspicion corroded community and trust. It was a world where privacy didn't exist, where your thoughts were never quite your own, where the knock on the door could come at any moment. Then we shifted perspective, stepping into the surprisingly mundane world of the Inquisitor himself, Brother Tomas, with his paperwork and procedures, his bureaucratic routines, his comfortable compartmentalization. We saw how systematic persecution could be rendered ordinary, even boring, through administrative process. The cruelty was no less real for being procedural, but it was easier to perpetrate when framed as just another job, just another set of forms to file. Our third segment took us into the archives, or rather into their absences, the gaps and silences that speak as eloquently as any preserved testimony. We confronted the fundamental incompleteness of historical knowledge, the way power shapes not just events but memory, not just actions but records. The past we can access is only what someone chose to preserve, and those choices were never neutral. Finally, we climbed to the top of the hierarchy, observing how those who orchestrated the system lived in comfortable distance from its consequences. The archbishop in his garden, the cardinal in his palace, enjoying luxuries while maintaining the machinery of persecution through abstract commands and sanitized reports. Privilege doing what privilege always does, insulating itself from the human cost of its advantages. What connects these four segments, the thread running through them all, is the theme of separation. Separation between public performance and private thought. Separation between bureaucratic process and human suffering. Separation between documented history and lived experience. Separation between power and accountability. The Inquisition was a system of enforced separations, keeping everything compartmentalized so that no one had to confront the full reality of what was happening. The prisoners couldn't know who had accused them or what evidence existed. The inquisitors worked from transcripts and forms, insulated from the actual humans whose lives they were judging. The high church officials received sanitized reports and made decisions in abstraction. And the ordinary people lived in fear precisely because they didn't know what the rules were or who was watching. This compartmentalization wasn't a flaw in the system. It was how the system worked. By keeping everyone separated, isolated, uncertain, the Inquisition created a kind of perpetual paralysis. People policed themselves because they didn't know what would trigger scrutiny. Inquisitors could proceed without mercy because the suffering happened elsewhere, recorded in documents but not witnessed. Church officials could maintain the apparatus because they never had to see its human cost directly. And here's what makes this history relevant beyond mere historical curiosity. These patterns persist. Not the Inquisition itself, obviously. That particular institution is long dead. But the patterns it exemplified, the way it organized power and knowledge and surveillance, these have contemporary echoes. Systems that watch while claiming to protect. Bureaucracies that process human lives with procedural detachment. Hierarchies where those making decisions are insulated from consequences. Archives that preserve what power wants, remembered while allowing the rest to disappear. We study the past not to condemn it from our position of temporal superiority, but to recognize patterns that might help us understand our present and shape our future. The Inquisition was particularly dramatic in its methods, but its logic, the logic of surveillance, compartmentalization, and privileged distance, isn't unique to one era or institution, but enough of heavy thoughts. If you came here for sleep, you've been patient with my tendency toward historical meditation. Let us return to the simpler purpose, helping you rest. Consider, as you drift, how fortunate you are to live when and where you do. Whatever challenges you face, and they're real, I don't minimize them. You don't face the Inquisition. Your thoughts are your own. Your prayers, if you offer them, are private. Your doubts, if you harbor them, are safe. The surveillance you experience, while real, doesn't involve torture and burning. The bureaucracies you navigate, while frustrating, don't threaten your immortal soul. This isn't cause for complacency. There's always work to do, always systems to question, always power to hold accountable. But it's cause for some measure of peace. You're here now, in a moment of safety. The past we've explored tonight cannot reach you. Its anxieties and cruelties belong to history, to be learned from but not lived. Feel your body now, heavy against your mattress. Notice your breathing, slow and steady. Acknowledge that your mind has been on a journey, but can now come home to the simple present. This room, this bed, this moment of transition between waking and sleeping. The Inquisition is over. The trials are finished. The prisoners are free, in the sense that death frees everyone eventually. The inquisitors have been judged by time and found wanting. The archives keep their secrets, and those secrets don't require your investigation tonight. The privileged church officials have faced whatever judgment awaits us all beyond this life. None of it is your burden to carry into sleep, so let it go. Release the weight of history. Allow the stories to fade like dreams upon waking, leaving only vague impressions, not sharp details. You've learned what there was to learn. You've contemplated what there was to contemplate. Now it's time to simply rest. The bells that called our ancestors to anxious prayers are silent. The cells are empty. The torture chambers are museums or rubble. The grand palaces of hypocritical bishops are tourist attractions. Time has done its work, dissolving the immediate threat while preserving the lesson. And the lesson, if we must name it one final time, is this: watch carefully when systems claim authority over souls. Question deeply when institutions demand trust without accountability. Resist always the temptation to compartmentalize, to distance yourself from the consequences of your choices, to enjoy privileges built on others' suffering. Remember that ordinary people, doing ordinary jobs, following ordinary procedures, can participate in extraordinary evil. Stay vigilant, stay questioning, stay human. But tonight, you don't have to stay vigilant. Tonight, you can rest. The watching can pause. The questioning can wait until morning. Being human includes the need for sleep, for surrender, for temporary release from consciousness and its burdens. So surrender now. Let the darkness behind your eyes become complete. Let the weight of your body become absolute. Let the rhythm of your breathing carry you down, down, deeper still, into the blessed oblivion where history has no power and anxiety cannot follow. Sleep, dear listener. Sleep well and deep. You've earned it by patiently listening to tales of distant suffering, by contemplating uncomfortable truths, by accompanying me through these 4 segments of historical exploration. Your reward is the simple gift of unconsciousness, the daily miracle of sleep. The Inquisition ended. Your day ends. Both conclusions are mercies. Close your eyes if they're not closed already. Relax your jaw. Let your shoulders drop. Feel the tension leaving your body like water draining away, leaving only heaviness, stillness, peace. The past is past. The present is safe. The future can wait until morning. Sleep now. Sleep